So you're thinking about moving to Great Falls, or maybe you live there currently. Maybe you're just perusing, trying to find the differences between Great Falls and where you live currently. Either way, you're in luck. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the pros and cons of living in Great Falls with some insider real estate tips from a Great Falls native straight to you. Let's get into it. Any conversation about living in Great Falls wouldn't be complete without first talking a little bit about pricing. With Montana now being on the map as a major state that people are moving to from other areas, we've seen a ton of appreciation over the last few years. That being said, Great Falls in general tends to still hold some of its affordability, both in terms of purchase or rent when compared to other cities of its size like Helena, Missoula, or Bozeman. In 2024, the median price point for a single family home was still in the low 300,000s, which is huge when you're comparing it with some of these other areas like Bozeman's $925,000 median. While Great Falls' appreciation rate does tend to be a little bit lower than these other areas as well, usually around that 3% mark versus 5 or 6 for some of these other larger, more quickly growing areas, it is still a great place to make an investment because it has been increasing in appreciation over the last few years as more people move there. Great Falls tends to be a little bit more blue collar than some of these other towns, and because of this, I think they've retained a lower cost of living than most of the rest of the state. In 2022, the cost of living in Great Falls was just about 87% of the national average, whereas Montana as a whole was about 103% of the national average. When it comes to the job market in Great Falls, things have been pretty steady for years, especially when you're looking at industries like healthcare, education, agriculture. The benefits healthcare system in Great Falls is known as one of the best in the state. A lot of people go there for their continuing education when it comes to nursing programs, different healthcare education options. Also, Malmstrom Air Force Base is a huge employer. A lot of people that move to Montana, a good percentage of them are Air Force relocations, so that has a huge contribution to the population size and kind of culture of Great Falls. That being said, if you are in more of a specialized field, entrepreneurial, opportunities in some of these niche industries may be a little bit limited in Great Falls unless you work at least partially in a remote fashion. Great Falls was actually named Great Falls due to the 5 major waterfalls with hydroelectric dams scattered throughout the city and a little bit beyond. Also has a couple interesting monikers, including the Electric City, also from the hydroelectric dams, the River City, because of the Missouri River. It's also been called the Western Art Capital of the world, likely due to the Charlie Russell Museum that draws people from all over the world to see some of this Western historic art. While Great Falls is located a little bit further from mountains and national parks than some of these other towns, Kalispell, Missoula, and Bozeman, it does still have a plethora of outdoor recreational opportunities available. The River's Edge Trail stretches for miles along the Missouri River with multiple access points to the river. Over the last few years, they've actually put rentable kayaks out next to the river that you can take out for a spin, which I thought was a cool touch. There are semi-limited hiking trails, but there are still options around. Sluice Box is one of my favorites. The famous Giant Springs National Park is gorgeous, absolutely have to check it out. It's known for having one of the shortest rivers, tributaries, anywhere in the country. There's a fish hatchery there. Most of your outdoor recreation, unless you drive a little bit further away, is going to be surrounding this river. However, there are a couple lakes nearby. Holter Lake is a big one that people commute to from Great Falls. You can make it to the Big Belt, Highwood, or Little Belt Mountains pretty easily from Great Falls. And the closest, there are a couple ski resorts fairly close. Teton is a fairly small family-operated ski area that I would definitely advise checking out. To the northwest of Great Falls, Showdown Ski Resort tends to be the most popular. It's a little over an hour from Great Falls to the east, but an absolute awesome mountain, great skiing, great culture, highly recommend. When it comes to community and culture in Great Falls, you know, the population of Great Falls is just over 60,000 people, but in many ways it feels a lot smaller. I feel like, you know, the 6 degrees of separation rule is probably more like 3 in Great Falls, where if you know somebody, or let's say you don't know somebody, I bet you know somebody that knows them. People tend to know a lot about what's going on with other people in the surrounding community without necessarily being nosy. It is big enough that, you know, you can kind of escape the rumor mill that comes with smaller towns. There's a bunch of great community events around Great Falls, and they're only growing. It is also the location of a lot of statewide events, including the State Fair, which is there. You know, being from Great Falls, I always just assumed that every area had a fair like ours in terms of size and kind of, you know, activities that could be had, but it truly is a state fair rather than a smaller county fair, and it feels like it. Great Falls has a fairly robust education system. You know, for a lot of higher education, college and whatnot, if you're going into a specialized degree, most people will seek those out elsewhere. However, Great Falls does have an MSU school. I, for instance, fresh out of high school, I did come to Bozeman for about 6 months for an engineering degree, found that I was spending way too much money to live in the dorms and take essentially general courses. So I actually went back to Great Falls, got an associate's degree geared towards engineering before coming back to Bozeman to pursue my higher 4-year engineering degree. And I've found that many people, you know, if they can stay in Great Falls and it makes sense for them, will, you know, take their first couple of years, get those general courses out of the way, and then because it is a Montana State school, for the most part, those credits will directly transfer to another MSU school like Bozeman's. When it comes to healthcare, like I touched on a little bit before, the Benefice healthcare system is one of Montana's leading facilities. It's growing every year. It's absolutely huge at this point. And I know people from around the state that will actually travel to Great Falls for their healthcare services. When talking about the public transportation system in Great Falls, you know, I might consider that to be more of a con. There is a bus route that travels throughout the city, but it isn't very widely used, doesn't cover a ton of area. A lot of people in Great Falls have multiple vehicles, are proud of them, and that's the main mode of transportation throughout the city. It's super easy to get around in Great Falls. I didn't realize how lucky I had it growing up there, but the whole city is shaped as a grid, and for the most part, the street names are numbered rather than fairly arbitrary names set up throughout time. So it's pretty easy to, you know, with the prevalence of technology, we have Google Maps and all this anyways, but navigating through the city is even easier than other areas, regardless of this technology, because of how it's laid out. There are a number of one-ways that are kind of back-to-back next to each other, so your first couple of times, I'd advise keeping an eye out for that. Otherwise, super easy to get around. Next, let's talk shopping. Great Falls does have quite a plethora of big box stores, and it seems like even more of these companies are putting locations in Great Falls as it grows. There are still a number of local, charming, smaller shops, but if you're coming from an area that's a little more artisan, for lack of a better term, you may feel that it's a little bit lacking in some of those types of stores. They still exist, but you kind of have to seek them out. Otherwise, a lot of your big names will be here in terms of shopping. Now that we've touched on mostly positive things, let's get into the cons a little bit. Great Falls is known for being, when it comes to the climate, a little bit windier than most other areas of the state. It doesn't make lists as far as topping out over areas like Lewistown or even Billings, but there is quite a bit of wind that blows through there. They don't have mountain ranges to really protect them, it's all in the flats, and with the river running through town, that can cool down the wind quite a bit as well. It doesn't tend to be too much colder than most other areas of the state, but that wind does create a wind chill that can make the winters a little bit harsh. Their average snowfall is less than these higher elevation, more mountainous areas like, say, Bozeman again, or Missoula. But it just takes a little bit of time to get used to. It's nothing that I would be afraid of. Another potential negative mark for Great Falls comes in the form of a lack of entertainment, nightlife. There are plenty of bar options, restaurants, but depending on where you're coming from, especially if you're coming from a culturally diverse, larger city, you may find a lot of the restaurants to kind of serve the same or very similar Americanized items. We did just in the last few years get a nice independent music venue downtown called the Newberry. It's getting some good acts, kind of few and far between. I think they're doing their best and great for, a town the size of Great Falls. But again, if you're coming from somewhere where you're used to seeing big headliner artists every weekend, you may be a little bit disappointed. Another thing to consider when moving to Great Falls is, it is pretty centrally located within the state. That being said, it is not necessarily in the middle of nowhere, but pretty far away from other towns, larger cities throughout Great Falls. And Montana's a huge state, so if you do a lot of driving to other states, other areas, and you're used to that sort of thing, might not be as daunting, but you're not going to spend, an hour in the car to get to an area with kind of completely different things to do, as opposed to some other areas of the state or even the country. Overall, I loved growing up in Great Falls. I think it's a great place to raise kids, a nice sense of community. Crime rates can be a little bit higher than some other areas of the state, but for the most part, it's not serious crime. It's an easy town to get around, and truly a great place to live. As I got a little bit older, I did find myself wanting a little bit more. It can, in some cases, as a teenager, feel a little bit stagnant with not a ton to do. But regardless of where you live, obviously, you kind of have to make it yours and make the best out of it. So what do you think? Is Great Falls calling your name? If you have any other questions, or it's settled and you're looking to invest or buy or sell in Great Falls, I'd love to help. It is a town that is near and dear to my heart, obviously, being born and raised there. Drop a comment below with your questions, or feel free to reach out if you have anything a little bit more nuanced that you prefer not to have online. Don't forget to like and subscribe.